Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
What's going on, Internet? Eric Van Holtz here, back again with another amazing e-commerce conversations. Hope all is going well. All is going well here because I got Jay.
Yeah, how's it going
Jay
today?
with Sauceda.
Sauceda, yeah.
Sauceda
Yeah.
Industries. That's
Yeah.
his last name, and he knew I was going to butcher it ahead of time. He's here.
Everybody does. Yeah. I always just tell people you spell it sauce, like the word sauce, D-A, and it pretty much sounds exactly the same way. Sauceda.
Yeah, but my pasty white skin and my European
Yeah.
ancestry has like no talent at all. Like I can't roll my R's.
The real like Mexican way to say it is Sauceda. So, but everybody kind of gives it the white guy, speech. So I've stuck with it.
Yeah, here in Austin, we got Guadalupe.
Yep.
All sorts of weird things.
Yeah.
So what is that business, man?
So
give me the rundown.
I was a photographer for a long time, actually, which is partially why the business is named after me. People just kind of, in the commercial photography space, you're known as like JB Sauceda Photography. So when I got out of that, I started an e-commerce store called Texas Humor. We had a few million followers on social media, started selling products to them. It's all just, Texas pride stuff, like shirts poking fun at other states, that kind of thing.
When you say social media, is that Instagram, Twitter? What is it?
Yeah, we started on Twitter, and then we grew the audience there to, just under 1 million followers, and then kind of jumped over to Instagram, jumped over to Facebook, et cetera. But, originally the business model was mostly media driven. So we would create content and then, serve it on a website, kind of like BuzzFeed, make money off the ads, whatever. But it was really inconsistent business, pivoted to retail. And, the actual funny part about that was that I'd had an online store in 2009, hated the shipping piece of it. So I had always sworn off ever getting into e-commerce again.
Yeah.
And so, we used Big Cartel as the cart, and then we used Order Cup as the shipping software. I mean, it's this hodgepodge system. It was terrible. And so, long story short, I said never again. And so when Texas Humor Store was getting off the ground, I tried to hire a fulfillment company and reached out to a few. Most of them either, told me that we were too small, so to call us once we were a little bigger, or, that it just wasn't the right fit.
Yeah. What year was this?
This was 2013.
Okay.
So the summer of that year. And then we launched it in November. But by that point, we had already kind of been told, hey, you're too small, do it yourself. So my wife and I hooked up Shopify to ShipStation. I would drink during the day and kind of like pour, some whiskey and answer emails and deal with all the CX stuff. And then in the evening, she would come home from her job and we would pack orders and ship them out. So, we did that for about, 6 months or so, hired somebody to come on board, help us do it. And got into a little warehouse, moved out of the garage to my office downtown, and then eventually to a warehouse like the August of 2014. But, I think a lot of business owners, you start bolting on these expenses and, it's not this like smooth growth of expenses. It seems like you go from not spending really any money to suddenly a shitload.
Yeah.
And, we were in this warehouse that we were using all of, 500 feet of. And I thought, how do we fill this thing up? And how do we specialize like our employees? And, instead of this guy running around and shipping, doing customer support and folding t-shirts. So we offered up the services and said, hey, is anybody else out there that's in need of this, that wants to just kind of co-op on it? And a lot of the people that I knew from the advertising world happen to have these little kind of side businesses. And, a long way down the road now, we're 126,000 square feet, got about 50 merchants, 100 employees, and we ship a shitload of stuff every day. It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
So,
well, hashtag ShipStation if anyone's watched TV.
Yeah.
They did a case study with ShipStation.
Yeah.
Beard brand.
Yeah. And they're here in Austin too.
Yeah.
So we still use it. It's not our core shipping platform anymore. Now that we have like a much more complex system or, setup, we needed something that can manage all of that. But for a single store, it's a really great shipping platform.
Yeah. I think exactly. Like if you're going to be sending your stuff out, I can't imagine.
Yeah. It's really straightforward.
So what I'm curious about, I've got a lot of questions that I want to know is nobody builds nearly 1 million followers on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, like, how do you do that? Like you just like blew by that.
Well, we got in on Twitter when the getting was good, right? So like, and I don't know how many of our followers are bots too, right? Like, there's a certain amount of everybody's followers that are just Russian bots. In our case, we got in when the getting was good.
So when is that? Like
2010, 11.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was a partner in a little graphic design studio called Public School in East Austin for a while. And one of the guys that was in that group had kind of fallen into some of these social media businesses. And he was explaining to me how they had built their audience. And he was, basically pointing out that Twitter at that point was shifting from this is what I ate for lunch to, actual companies developing content specifically for that platform, like just, jokes and, news, whatever. So he kind of taught me how they had figured out how to trigger people into following them. Back then what he was doing, he had a business that had a fairly similar name to another, kind of high profile business. And he would basically follow people that followed that brand and then unfollow them, and then they would follow back, right? So once he got a few thousand followers, that's all it really took. And back then, everybody was just willy-nilly following. And we had a similar situation. Like I started with Texas Humor, had some good content. He needed help retouching a photo one day. And so I, spent a few hours doing this thing. And he was like, I'll trade you a retweet for, your time. And I ended up with like 10,000 followers. And then once you end up with that back then, boom. I mean, the next milestone's like 50,000 and the next is 100 and then 200. And so that growth has slowed down. Now really where we grow a lot is on Instagram and Facebook, and we're starting to do more on TikTok. But yeah, every platform, we try to test it out in the early days. So when it starts getting out there, we ask ourselves, like, is this an area that we think that we can be, good, and our voice can kind of translate into that medium? And if we do, then if we do believe that, then we do go ahead and dive in. So
yeah, I also did. I've been on Twitter since 2008, I think, and did the unfollow thing. And then what I'll notice is like the bot would automatically follow like someone with a private account. And then like years later, they'll finally like accept it. I'm like, why am I following this like rando person?
Yeah.
And then I realized they just finally accepted the request. So.
Yeah, I got in, I personally joined it right after South by that year. I think that was like 07 or 08, something like that. And I've always gotten a lot out of it. I just think, it's like me and you. I mean, I think our relationship mostly had been Twitter initially, and then we've gotten to like kind of meet up a couple of times. But in general, I just love that it puts everybody one degree of separation away from everybody else, And so I still love that platform, probably the most out of all of them.
I've said it multiple times on this podcast that the Twitter D2C community is really a great community, really engaging, really friendly and welcoming. So if you haven't gotten on Twitter yet, get on there, follow me, follow Jay, follow the people who have been on this podcast before, and just start talking to them because they'll talk back.
Oh man, it's, starting a business and trying to bootstrap it like you and I have done. I mean, you have to lean on every resource possible. And if you're not looking to other people who've already solved the problems that you have, then you're going to waste a lot of time and probably make some pretty big mistakes. So, cut to the chase. I'm sure you and I, between the two of us, we can probably teach people a lot of shortcuts.
Yeah. So we've got Texas Humor and we've got your fulfillment company.
Yeah.
When does the fulfillment company take over Texas Humor in terms of like your baby, right?
I would say about 4 years ago, it really started to grow in size. For the first couple of years, it was really there to just help us cover costs. And then we realized, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just operating it in the way that we thought that it made sense. And a lot of people were calling me because it was more just kind of intriguing that this guy who used to be creative, like in that space was now doing this other thing. So our first really big client was actually Haller Brothers, another clothing brand based here in Austin. And the CMO there, this guy, Rick Wittenbreaker, was familiar with me from when he was at Yeti. And so he had been the CMO there and had seen my work bid on some Yeti projects at the ad agency that they used. So somehow or another, I think the guy that sells us cardboard boxes was over at their facility, kind of made a comment about, he heard them complaining about their 3PL, and he kind of mentioned, hey, there's a company in South Austin, this guy Jay, he might be able to help you out. And it just kind of piqued his interest. And he went, wait, the dude that used to shoot photos, like what? So we connected, and our ignorance to the way that things operate is, I think, our biggest strength. Now, obviously, we feel like we're experts, but it's guided our direction in a very, very different approach than I think most other 3PLs. So 4 years ago, we bring on Haller Brothers. Now suddenly that business is about as big as, the Texas Humor side of things. And then shortly thereafter, it just kind of started to ramp up. Over the years, we've worked with, Haller, William Murray Golf. There's a really great bra company called Pepper, Tecovas Boots, which is here in Austin. Who else? Kamek. I mean, just a litany of these really great upstarts. And, one of the other approaches that's a little different is we're willing to take a chance on a brand that has no volume if we, can take a look at what they're trying to do to launch. So another great example is Duck Camp. It's a kind of bird hunting brand that's just exploded over the last couple of years. And when they came to us, they just had an idea, but we liked what their approach was and we liked how they were thinking about their go-to-market strategy. And I mean, they're one of our biggest clients now, and a lot of 3PLs just would never have even signed them in that first year. So, I mean, it didn't take long for us to get big.
So from my perspective, it's been years since I've gotten into it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were looking in the early stages, we were only doing like 9 orders
Mm-hmm.
a month or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. But I knew I just never wanted to be in the fulfillment game. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wanted my focus to be on building the business.
Do you guys use someone right now or do y'all do it internally?
No, we work with a third party.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So when I was looking though, like I feel like the 3PLs, they weren't really even focused on e-commerce.
Right.
It was just like storage or whatever, or big companies
Mm-hmm.
or, keeping pallets.
That's the thing. It's like the processes don't exist or they didn't exist at a lot of those places. So, you see the ship bobs and the shipmonks kind of eating their lunch because they were founded with e-com in mind. And we play in this really interesting space that's kind of between the XPOs and the Geoduses and the ship bobs and the shipmonks. Like, Casey Armstrong from ShipBob and I are good friends and, we talk a lot and they do things that we can't and we do things that they can't. So the space that we're really strong in is the complex. So most 3PLs, really want to do simplicity, right? Like operations is the game of trying to simplify.
You go in this box,
Yep.
you use this kind of packaging or void fill.
Yep.
And
how much can we automate through software and
Right.
processes, right? So in our business, like our first big client being Howler Brothers, I mean, they had a ton of SKUs. So we didn't know any different about shying away from those types of merchants and only focusing over here. So we did those and they're really simple. And then we just got good at doing the complex. And so now we sort of live in this little middle spot where, unless someone's growing really, really rapidly, we're a pretty solid spot for someone to stay, up until they hit probably 40, 50 million. Maybe now with our larger warehouse, we could take people further. But, Tecovas Boots is a good example. Fantastic relationship with them. Took them from a really small, inventory footprint to a really, really large one. And then it made sense for their organization. Like they grew to the size where they could manage a 3PL as a e-commerce company, and it made sense for them to go to one of these really large facilities that can really tailor the services and stuff around what they're doing. But yeah, we pride ourselves on being that organization that can take you from really small to big.
so how many orders is that? So
The average merchants that we're working with do between 100 and 300 a day. We're on a daily basis shipping between 5 and 10,000 packages. So it just varies based off of the seasonality. The other side of our business is the wholesale component. So, let's pretend Beard Brand's a client of ours. We're going to ship all your D2C stuff. And then, you get a deal with Target or you get a deal with, Walmart. And it's got all those EDI requirements, all the crap that you have to deal with the really big retailers. We have a function of our company that does that as well. So on the item count level, which is the more accurate way to kind of depict it, we ship between 15 and 30,000, individual items a day. So
yeah, that's wild.
yeah.
Are you at that point now where you're turning away the little guys?
Yes and no. I think the approach is a little different, right? Like the 3PL that was kind of, a jerk to us, they're no longer that company, right? Like I had beers with their CEO recently and we were kind of laughing about this story, like the origin story that someone on their team was a jerk to me and suddenly it created like their competitor in town, right? And so I get why they had to turn us away because up front, there's so many complexities of onboarding with the 3PL that unless you're a really simple store with only a handful of SKUs, it requires work. And so most merchants kind of think, I'm going to hire a 3PL so I don't have to think about this anymore. And it's more that like, I'm going to hire them so I don't have to become an expert in it. Like that's really why you hire a 3PL, not so it's, set it and forget it. And, in the case of the small guys, we do have to charge for some of these onboarding fees and things. And more often than not, what we're doing is helping build your store to streamline for scale. And if we get the sense that you're not quite ready for it, or we get the sense for you're not ready for change and like putting on your big boy pants to grow, then yeah, we'll just say, hey, it's not no, it's just not right now. And we'll give you some information on how you can kind of scale up without the headaches. Really just the information I needed to do it myself for 6 months. Because if you do have a great product and you do have a good marketing plan, you'll be big enough in 6 months to come on board with us. But if you're pre-revenue, unless you've got like previous experience in the e-com space, you sort of know your way around the business, it's a little harder for us to make that bet. And it's less that we're unwilling to do it and more that I don't want you to be pissed off at me that you're only shipping 2 or 3 items in a month and you're paying me storage fees and all this other stuff to maintain it, So
What does it look like as an e-commerce person who's never sent stuff out, you're just like, oh, you just grab stuff, you put it in the box. How is this so hard? But clearly, I go into the forums and everyone bitches about their 3PL.
Everybody. I mean, people bitch about us. I mean, that's just the nature of it.
So what is it that e-commerce owners just don't get about 3PLs and why it's so damn hard?
Yeah.
And how maybe you should have more patience, or how you might be able to work a little bit better in a way that it's more of a win-win situation rather than both people bitching.
I mean, I've got kind of two canned answers. For the first one is something I tweet like every 6 months, that the shipping business is not the shipping business. It's the exceptions management business. So putting the shit in the box and sending out the door, that's actually the easiest part of the job. It's what happens when the purchase order was off by 15 units and we had to rush it in because you launched your marketing calendar, today, even though the inventory literally landed on our dock today. And so you gave us the green light to dock to stock it real quickly without counting it and just approving and saying, yeah, it's all there. And then we find out on the bottom of the barrel that, they're 15 short. Well, okay, what do we do with those 15 orders that have already been sold? Or, what do you do when a customer emails at 4:45 and they absolutely need something shipped out today to get to, them before they leave, whatever. So all of those little things are what actually create the indigestion for most merchants when they start scaling up, and they don't really think about those processes ahead of time. And so if you're not doing that daily, then it turns into, a gigantic mess. So think about any major thing that you might cook, or whatever. Like, okay, so I'm Mexican. You don't just like sit down one day and decide to make tamales, right? Like you got all these different steps. And so typically to make tamales, my mom would have some people over to the house. They would all like have some drinks, and one person's doing this, one person's doing, right? And you break it into a series of steps. And next thing you know, you've made a shitload of them and you pass them all out to everybody. Like that's the way to get it done, easily. But you need a lot of hands and you have to have a process. You're not going to just sit down and make one. So it's kind of the same thing where unless you're doing it at scale, it's hard to have those processes built in. So then when the exception shows up, suddenly you're not prepared for it and it takes way more time than you need. So that's one piece of it. Then the other piece is I think very few merchants ever really care to understand the fulfillment side. And so either they get on board with a 3PL who's just trying to dial for dollars and gets them in too early, or they're lucky and they're able to find a 3PL who takes them on before they even launch. And so they just never go through that experience themselves. So we, as a kind of approach to sales, really like merchants who've already been at other 3PLs or have done it themselves, because they already know what to deal with the 3PL. And they know, like, I've spent the time in the warehouse, I know how much this sucks, So those are the two qualifiers. It doesn't mean that that's what we need, but it certainly helps when people have that experience. So my coaching moment is to say, like, don't let us take that how I built this moment from you. Like, you're going to want those stories about the pile of orders that you had, or you'll recognize how hard it is to staff when your marketing team wasn't planning to launch something and then it just blows up. So those are the reality checks that we always like for people to have, but not everybody has them. So it's on us to coach into that.
Yeah. So you said you've got about 50 customers, right?
Yeah, about
all
50
e-commerce?
merchants. All e-commerce, yeah.
I assume you get approached by people outside the e-commerce space? Or?
A little bit, but our website's pretty clearly focused on e-com and just, about that. So I'll get companies who call and they just want us to do kitting projects, like put these things into a box, whatever. We get a little bit of storage requests, but we're not like the XPOs and the Geodises or some of the older kind of, there's like Lone Star Fulfillment and some of these other groups here in town that will do a little bit more of the traditional fulfillment. Most people know us for the e-com, and that's really where we prefer to play.
So I would imagine having 50 clients is, of course, a blessing and a curse. Like now you've got a staff that isn't as up and down, dependent on like one or two clients. How do you see like the demand? Obviously, fourth quarter is probably killer for you guys, but how do you typically see the demand among 50 other e-commerce stores?
It's kind of a mixture of things. I mean, being a merchant myself is helpful because I can kind of gauge how they'll grow. So, in our contracts, we build it out and we say, look, here's our service level agreement of how quickly we're going to ship everything for you. But within that, agreement is this expectation that you communicate with us. You can't, it'd be like if me and my wife were trying to two-step at the Broken Spoke and like I couldn't touch her. How would she know which move I'm going to make? And, you have to have those little signals that you give to one another, kind of physically. E-commerce fulfillment's the same exact thing. Like if you don't tell me that you've got a marketing effort launching tomorrow and it's quadruple your sales, how do you expect me to get those orders out? So that two-way street and that collaboration is what we're really, keen on. And I won't say that we've always been perfect at it, but, I recruited this woman, Kasha Rowe from Yeti last year, and she's now our director of client success. And that's a big part of her job, is really just sussing out that information. So, we know that not everyone's going to have like full-on finance and FP&A capabilities in-house, but we can at least talk to you about what you're going to be doing to get a sense for what that volume demand is going to look like. But, as some merchants grow, they start to dial in things like their acquisition costs, and they know I'm going to put in $1,000 and that's going to turn into 50 orders or however many orders. And when that starts happening, then the real magic takes place between the organizations, because we can really dial in and grow with them. But if you're under 100 orders a day, if you're under, even 200 orders, like there's rarely any kind of volume pop that you're going to see that we can't absorb.
Right.
It's when like you're a 500 or 1,000 order merchant and you pop 20, 30%. I mean, that's suddenly becomes pretty, it can be sizable if you're not communicating with us effectively. So,
yeah. Do you have like one person just managing all 50 accounts, or?
No, we're actually, when I get off of this podcast, part of the reason I've got to head back is we're announcing a reorg that's happening. So we're moving out of an older building that we were in into this 126,000. And as a function of that, we're going to be redoing some of the ways that we look at our departments. Historically, we've seen ourselves as more of like a retail business, right? Like I have my brands on the top of it, and then these are functions that service that brand, and we sell those services to other companies. We're taking that and kind of looking at it as more of a flat structure. We're really more of an operations business now with a really good marketing team and creative team. But rather than have all of our operations roll up to a singular leadership team member, like a COO type, we're instead breaking it out based off of the different functions. And so our finance team, who's really nitpicky about detail, they're going to be overseeing, more of our inventory functions and the fidelity of inventory. We'll have someone overseeing our shipping teams, and because that's all day level stuff. And then we'll have, our client services, which will oversee our special projects, our inbound, and our returns, which those are typically the departments where there are goopier types of processes that come across. And so we want that team paired off with the group of people who communicate with our clients most often. So I heard this saying from a friend of mine over at Shopify, this guy, Thomas Epting. He made a comment that, if you're reorganizing your company every, 18 months, you're probably doing it too slowly. And if you're doing it every 6 months, you're probably going too quick. And so finding that balance somewhere in between is really solid. And that's kind of how it's played out for us. Like we have to redo it every, 9 to 12 months to, as we've grown, because we, when you double in size, that's a pretty big jump. So
let's talk about the technology stack behind a fulfillment house. Like you're moving into 125,000 square foot facility. I imagine that's pretty big. Are you at the point where you're bringing in automation and robots? Like I was on Twitter and I saw this freaking robot that climbs up
the HEB one that like drives up the little rail. And grabs a box.
It just blows my mind. Like
super cool.
Yeah. But like, as you say, like you're really good at doing the complex stuff. Does that eliminate your opportunity for automation? And how does the technology work in a 3PL, and how can it really help you differentiate?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yes and no. So everything, like if you control everything 100%, right? Like you can put specific barcodes on the product, you can dictate what kind of boxes they arrive in, all of that. Sure, you can automate the hell out of your warehouse. A lot of upfront costs. You're never really going to truly, replace humans in that role. But I think what does happen is the automation can supplement the human beings that are there, and you can probably drive wages up and, hire people that are a little bit more specialized, train and develop people up. So that's a really exciting aspect of it to me. Like I don't see it as this like zero sum game. I see it as more complementary. We're not there yet because the majority of the merchants that we work with are not mature process wise in the early stage that they come in. They also have it budgeted to put all these barcodes and all this other information on. Like they're literally just trying to climb out from under a pile of orders. So the long-term objective and where a lot of our, more mature merchants are is that, we would be able to benefit from that. Will we be at a point where that like robot that drives up and like grabs stuff off a shelf does things for us? That's probably not in our cards. But I do think things like, some of the pick to light features where, you've got these like light systems that tell you what to grab off of what shelf. I've seen some really great stuff like that company that Shopify bought, Six River Systems. Like their whole deal is these trucks that drive around in the warehouse to the people. And so rather than have pickers like I have who walk the entire floor, and kind of in an efficient way, you keep your people in the aisle. They become specialists of that area and they're grabbing the product and putting it on a cart that then drives to the next place and the next place and that kind of thing. So I'm excited by that stuff. But again, we've got a very, very focused approach on wanting to make sure there are more people developing businesses like you and I. And we want to kind of remove the obstacles to scale and remove those like really awful customer service moments when you just explode. And, for right now, that's the primary focus. So, but we use Ship Hero. That's the WMS that supports us. They've got their own fulfillment network too, but, they kind of have their specialty. And so we have a really good relationship with them and have had a good overall experience with their software. And so it powers our warehouse.
Yeah. For all the listeners out there who are about to go shop with a 3PL, what are some realistic expectations they have in terms of like a price range, a ship date, like how do they know they're getting in with a good 3PL or not?
I think I would start. So the biggest signal to me is how much listening is the 3PL doing when you start the conversation? Every merchant is unique. The processes are all very similar, but every merchant's unique. So if they're sending you an email into your inbox and they're making up some number telling you that they can save you 30% on your postage and blah, 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 like they don't know shit about your brand. There's some guy or girl who's just dialing for dollars, and it's a math equation. Like if I email 100 people, 3 of them are going to close and I'm going to make my like sales quota. So the concerning thing for me in that approach is that there's bad alignment between sales objectives and operational excellence. Like rarely, you don't have this, oversight of the operations on the sales processes there. So in my opinion, if you're not getting a lot of questions about, anything specific about your brand, what are the current challenges you're seeing and doing it yourself or with your other 3PL, like that's a signal to me that they're just trying to close you and get you in. And you should be concerned that there isn't a lot of concern on their side for what balls may be dropped through the onboarding process. At our company, the team who facilitates your client success, like the relationship and account servicing, that team handles sales. So they're the ones deciding whether or not we will be good at servicing you or not. And then they're responsible for making sure that the shit gets done once you come on board, So I think if you can find a team that thinks about that and you can ask those questions, like who am I going to be talking to once I onboard? Am I going to be using a ticket system or do I get a dedicated person? Those are all really important for the relationship. As far as pricing goes, it kind of varies. If you're shipping something like this, right? Like you've got your fragrances and you got 5 of them, and that's it. You could probably find a 3PL who could do that with like no custom packaging and really simple, straightforward stuff for between $1 and, $1.75 an order. Like that's not unreasonable if you've got good volume.
Right.
If you're shipping between like 50 and 100 orders a day, probably going to be on the higher end of that spectrum, closer to $2 or so. And if you want to get to the lower end, you're going to be probably shipping upwards of like 1,000 orders a day, something like that. Custom packaging sucks for 3PLs unless you've got a lot of volume. So expect to pay for that.
And a lot of volume is 500 orders.
500 or more. Yeah. So like if you're doing between like my floor, I think is like 3,000 to 5,000 orders a month is like where we really like you to be before we do custom packaging, because you have to keep in mind, like these people who are working on the warehouse, like in our building, we use a lot of people who are full-time with us. They're not like some temp agency. But a lot of the folks at a lot of other companies, the packers, the majority are people that are brought in for the first time that day. Temps are great. We use them too. But, do you want someone packing your order with a lot of complexity on their first day on the job? Like probably not. So that's where you want to kind of just think about your exercises and say like, maybe the packaging isn't as important. Maybe it's the actual product being dressed up or like drop-ins and things like that can dress up the customer experience. But then outside of that, I would say like the more prep work you do on things like your purchase orders being in good shape, making sure your vendors, adhere to processes and stuff like that, the better you're going to see on your inbound fees, your hourly expenses, that kind of stuff, So, and then as far as like a reasonable SLA, like, I'm not of this mindset that a lot of people are, that you have to compete with Amazon's delivery services. If the thing you sell is only available on your website, get it to them wherever the hell you want. Get it to them quickly, and try to deliver that, but don't kill yourself trying to match Amazon's like levels of service. Like that's just people are buying toilet paper and they want that the next day on Amazon. If I order something like one of those one-wheel skateboards, like I don't need that tomorrow. There's nothing that's like urgent about it, So the delivery expectations are different, so don't kill yourself over that stuff. And don't let someone try to sell you like purely on that either. It's focus on the quality. That's what's most important.
So you're thinking like a 24-hour turn?
I think 24-hour turn is pretty typical. Normally what we'll coach is we'll say, okay, you've got 100 orders a day and I want to be realistic about what I can get out. I know that you're probably not going to be good at giving me forecast data, and you're probably going to launch sales and stuff. And I don't want to spend the next 6 months like fighting with you about our SLA performance because you're doing unreasonable volume and expecting me to unreasonably be prepared for that. So the way that we set it up is we'll say of your shipping volume, we're going to take like 60 to 70% of it, which is typically your basic service. And our SLA is that if it comes in today, then it'll ship by tomorrow, by end of day tomorrow. It may ship today, but it may also ship tomorrow. If it comes in today by 2:00 with any kind of express services like FedEx or UPS, it'll go today. Anything after that will go tomorrow. And that's mostly because the express pickups at like 3:30 or 4. So we need to be able to get it on a truck. But yeah, same day, we have a few merchants that we do same day with, but we have the expectation that they have to give us forecast data. And if they don't, then orders roll. That's just kind of the way it works, so.
Sweet. Where can people learn more about you, contact you, support you?
So SaucedaIndustries.com is a website for the 3PL, SAUCEDA Industries.com. They can find me on Twitter, JAYB Sauceda, SAUCEDA, and on pretty much every other platform. But I kind of poke around a little bit on the e-commerce fuel platform. Not in there quite as much as I used to be, but I'm on there. I'm pretty active in the 2PM community and just love talking to merchants. So yeah, I'm always happy to communicate with people about it.
Sweet, man. Well, thanks for coming by the office and sharing your expertise on 3PLs. I learned a lot. I know it's a headache for a lot of people. So hopefully this will open some eyes and set reasonable expectations on both parties to be able to have great experiences for your customers. Thanks for being on the show. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
And keep on growing.